What is the true measure of a man's character? In the unforgiving Kansas frontier of 1882, a town revealed its ugly heart when a woman with nowhere to go found every door closed to her. They called her ruined, damaged goods, a stain on their righteous community. But at the edge of town stood a ranch owned by a man who knew what it meant to be judged by appearance rather than character. Some folks only see scars. I see survival. Stay until the end to witness how one act of compassion not only saved a life, but transformed an entire frontier town, revealing a truth about human dignity so powerful that history tried to bury it. Before we dive deeper into this extraordinary story, I need you to take action right now. Hit that subscribe button and ring that notification bell. Why? Because The Black Rancher is dedicated to uncovering the forgotten heroes of the American West. The black cowboys, ranchers, and pioneers whose courage and compassion helped shape this nation's true character. If you believe that every person deserves dignity and that history should remember those who stood against hatred, then this channel is for you. Share this video with someone whose heart needs this message today and join our community of truth seekers. Welcome to The Black Rancher. Now let's journey back to Kansas, 1882, where our story begins. Elmwood, Kansas, April 1882. The spring rain turned to an icy downpour as evening settled over Elmwood. The main street, usually bustling with activity, stood nearly deserted as townspeople hurried home for supper. All except for one figure, a woman whose soaked blue dress clung to her trembling frame as she made her way from door to door. Sarah Mitchell's face, once known for its easy smile, now bore the hollow expression of someone who had lost everything. 3 days ago, she'd arrived on the eastbound train with nothing but the clothes on her back and a small cloth bag containing her few remaining possessions. 3 days of rejection, of whispers, of doors closing before she could fully explain herself. "Please," Sarah called, her voice barely audible over the rain as she knocked on the door of the Wilsons' boarding house. "I can work, I can cook, clean, anything you need." The door opened just enough for Mrs. Wilson's pinched face to appear. The older woman's eyes narrowed as she recognized Sarah. "We've heard about you," Mrs. Wilson said, her voice as cold as the rain. "Word travels fast, even from St. Louis. A woman who abandons her husband, who breaks her sacred vows. We don't harbor your kind in Elmwood." "My husband was—" Sarah began, but the door slammed shut before she could finish. "He was a monster," she wanted to say. "He beat me until I couldn't see through the swelling. He took everything from me, my inheritance, my dignity, my hope." But Elmwood didn't want to hear that part of the story. They'd already decided who she was: fallen, broken, unworthy. The general store, the church, the small hotel, all had turned her away. Now, with darkness falling and the temperature dropping, Sarah trudged toward the edge of town where the buildings thinned out, giving way to scattered homesteads and eventually open prairie. Her lungs burned with each breath as she continued walking, no longer knowing where she was heading. The rain had soaked through to her skin and her fingers had gone numb. In the distance, a soft light glowed through the curtain of rain, a lantern burning in the window of a small cabin set back from the main road. Lightning flashed, illuminating a wooden sign swinging from a post. "Crescent Moon Ranch." Sarah hesitated. She had heard whispers about this place during her brief time in town, about the black rancher who lived there alone, who kept to himself, who rarely came into Elmwood except to sell his cattle or buy supplies. The townspeople tolerated him because he was skilled with livestock and never caused trouble. But they made it clear he wasn't truly one of them. Another home where she would likely face rejection. Another door that would close in her face. But the alternative was a night in the open, exposed to the elements. With the last of her strength, Sarah stumbled toward the cabin, her feet slipping in the mud. The porch steps creaked under her weight as she climbed them, raising a trembling hand to knock on the solid wooden door. For several long moments, there was no response. Then, from inside, came the sound of approaching footsteps. The door swung open, revealing a tall man with broad shoulders, his dark skin accentuated by the warm light behind him. His eyes, deep brown and alert, took in the sight of the bedraggled woman on his doorstep. Isaiah Freeman had seen his share of desperate people. He'd been one himself not so many years ago. "Miss," he said, his voice deep but gentle. "Are you lost?" Sarah opened her mouth to speak, but a wave of dizziness overcame her. Her legs buckled beneath her as the world tilted sideways. The last thing she remembered was strong arms catching her before she hit the ground, and a voice saying something she hadn't heard in longer than she could remember. "It's all right. You're safe now." Sarah awoke to unfamiliar surroundings. A small but tidy cabin, a fire crackling in a stone hearth, and the smell of coffee brewing. She lay on a narrow bed covered with several thick blankets. Her wet clothes had been replaced by a man's flannel shirt, far too large for her frame, and a pair of woolen socks. For a moment, panic seized her. Then she saw her dress and undergarments hanging near the fire to dry, and a privacy screen positioned between the bed and the rest of the cabin. Relief flooded through her, followed quickly by embarrassment. "You're awake," came a deep voice from the other side of the screen. "There's hot coffee when you're ready." Sarah's throat felt raw when she tried to speak. "Thank you," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "You had a fever," the man continued. "Been sleeping for nearly 2 days. I fetched the doctor from town, but—" He paused. "He wouldn't come. Said he was too busy." The unspoken truth hung in the air between them. The doctor hadn't come because of who owned this cabin, and possibly because of who she was. "I did what my mother taught me for fevers. Willow bark tea and cool cloths. Seems to have worked." Sarah pushed herself up against the pillows, wincing at the ache in her limbs. "I don't know how to thank you, Mr. Freeman, Isaiah Freeman." He stepped around the screen, keeping a respectful distance from the bed. In his hands, he held a steaming mug. "But no need for thanks. Couldn't leave you out in that storm." In the daylight, she could see him clearly for the first time. Isaiah Freeman was perhaps 40 years old, with close-cropped hair showing touches of grey at the temples. His face bore the weathered look of a man who spent his days outdoors, but his eyes were kind. A scar ran along his right forearm, the kind left by shackles, she realized with a start. "The town," Sarah began, then faltered. How could she explain? "I know Elmwood didn't welcome you," Isaiah said, setting the coffee on a small table within her reach. "Small towns can be that way. Quick to judge, slow to forgive." "They heard about me from St. Louis," she said, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "My husband told everyone I abandoned him, that I was unfaithful. But he—" She stopped, pressing her lips together. Isaiah nodded slowly. "You don't have to tell me your story, Miss Mitchell." "Sarah Mitchell." She took a deep breath. "And it's Mrs., though I'd give anything not to be." A look of understanding crossed Isaiah's face. He pulled a chair near the bed, though not too close, and sat down. "Mrs. Mitchell, you can rest here until you're well. After that, if you need help getting to the next town over, I can take you. Might be easier to start fresh somewhere new." Sarah clutched the mug of coffee between her hands, letting its warmth seep into her still cold fingers. "Why are you helping me? Everyone else in town—" "I know something about being judged before you've had a chance to speak your piece," Isaiah said simply. "And I know something about needing a door to open when all others have closed." He stood up, moving toward the door. "I need to check on the cattle. There's stew in the pot if you're hungry. Rest as much as you need." As he reached for his coat, Sarah found her voice again. "Mr. Freeman, they won't like that you've helped me." "The town, I mean." Isaiah's mouth curved in a small, sad smile. "Mrs. Mitchell, they've barely tolerated me for 7 years. I stopped worrying about what Elmwood thinks a long time ago." With that, he pulled on his coat and hat and stepped out into the cool morning air, leaving Sarah to wonder about this quiet man who had opened his door when all others remained closed. By the end of the week, Sarah had regained enough strength to help around the cabin. Isaiah had insisted she continue to rest, but idleness had never suited her. Besides, it felt good to repay his kindness in whatever small ways she could: cooking meals, mending shirts, tidying the already neat cabin. They settled into an easy routine. Isaiah would rise before dawn to tend to his cattle and horses, returning mid-morning for a hot meal. Sarah found herself watching for him from the window, admiring the confident way he handled the animals. the gentle commands he used instead of the harsh ones she'd heard from other ranchers. "You have a way with them," she observed one afternoon as he brushed down his favorite mare, a dappled gray named Silver. Isaiah smiled, one of his rare, full smiles that transformed his serious face. "Animals know who means them harm and who doesn't. They don't care about the color of your skin or where you came from, just how you treat them. People could learn from that," Sarah said softly. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching horses. Isaiah straightened, his expression instantly alert. "Stay in the barn," he said quietly, handing her the brush. "Please." Sarah nodded, stepping deeper into the shadows of the barn as Isaiah walked out to meet the visitors. From where she stood, she could see 3 men on horseback, all familiar faces from Elmwood. The mayor, Harold Thompson, the owner of the general store, Peter Williams, and the town's self-appointed moral guardian, Reverend Simmons. "Freeman," Mayor Thompson called out, not bothering to dismount. "We need to talk." Isaiah stood his ground, arms at his sides, his posture relaxed but watchful. "Gentlemen, what brings you out to Crescent Moon?" Reverend Simmons leaned forward in his saddle. "We've heard you're harboring that Mitchell woman, the one who abandoned her husband back east." "Mrs. Mitchell was ill," Isaiah replied evenly. "I offered shelter during her recovery." "That's mighty charitable," Williams said, his tone making it clear he thought it was anything but. "But surely she's well enough to move on now." "Where she goes is her decision," Isaiah said. "Not mine, and certainly not yours." The mayor's face reddened. "Now see here, Freeman. We've allowed you to keep this ranch because you keep to yourself and don't cause trouble. But harboring a woman of questionable character, that crosses a line." "Allowed me?" Isaiah's voice remained calm, but Sarah could hear the steel beneath it. "I bought this land fair and square, Mayor Thompson. I pay my taxes. I break no laws." "The reputation of our town," Reverend Simmons began, "has nothing to do with who stays in my home," Isaiah finished for him. "Now, unless you have actual business with me, I have work to attend to." The 3 men exchanged glances. Finally, the mayor spoke again, his voice lower, more threatening. "You do well to remember your place, Freeman. Folks have been tolerant, but tolerance has its limits." With that, they turned their horses and rode away, kicking up dust as they went. Only when they were out of sight did Isaiah's shoulders relax slightly. He turned toward the barn, his eyes finding Sarah in the shadows. "I'm sorry you heard that," he said as she stepped out into the sunlight. Sarah's hands were trembling, but her voice was steady. "I should go. I'm bringing trouble to your door." Isaiah shook his head. "This trouble was here long before you arrived, Mrs. Mitchell. They've been looking for an excuse." "Because you're—" She hesitated, unsure how to continue. "Because I own land they think should belong to someone who looks like them," Isaiah said matter-of-factly. "Because I built something for myself after they were sure I'd fail, and because I don't bow my head when they speak to me." He looked out across his land, the small herd of cattle grazing in the distance, the sturdy barn, the fields he'd cleared with his own hands. "I was born a slave in Georgia," he said quietly. "Worked another man's land for 27 years before freedom came. When I finally saved enough to buy this place, I swore I'd never let fear of what others might do dictate how I live my life." Sarah moved to stand beside him, following his gaze across the ranch. "It's beautiful, what you've built here." Isaiah nodded, a hint of pride crossing his features. "It's mine. No one can take that away." But as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the land, both of them knew that wasn't entirely true. In this time and place, there were many things that could be taken, many ways to lose what you'd worked for, especially when you were already seen as an outsider. Folks, I need to pause here because what comes next in our story will shake you to your core. But before we continue this powerful journey, take a moment to support the Black Rancher channel. Hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and share this video with someone who appreciates stories of courage and dignity in the face of injustice. These forgotten chapters of American history deserve to be told, and your support helps us continue uncovering these powerful narratives. Now let's return to Elmwood, Kansas, 1882, where the consequences of kindness are about to unfold. The threats from town didn't materialize immediately. Days passed, then a week, and life at Crescent Moon Ranch continued its peaceful rhythm. Sarah regained her strength, and with it came a new sense of purpose. She had begun to help Isaiah with more than just household tasks, learning to feed the chickens, collect eggs, and even assist with the vegetable garden behind the cabin. Each evening, they would sit by the fire and talk. Isaiah spoke of his dreams for the ranch, expanding his herd, building a larger house someday, perhaps even hiring hands to help with the work. Sarah shared stories of her childhood in Pennsylvania, her love of books, and her talent for numbers. What she didn't speak of was her marriage, the gradual way her husband had isolated her from family and friends, how his charming public face had hidden a private cruelty, how he had taken her inheritance and used it to finance his gambling debts. She didn't need to. Isaiah seemed to understand that some wounds were still too fresh to expose to the air. As April turned to May, bringing warmer weather and longer days, Sarah found herself smiling more often. Sometimes she would catch Isaiah watching her with an expression she couldn't quite define, something between wonder and caution, as if he too was surprised by the easy companionship that had grown between them. "I should find work soon," she said one evening as they sat on the porch, watching fireflies emerge in the gathering dusk. "I can't impose on your kindness forever." Isaiah was quiet for a moment. "You're not imposing," he finally said. "Truth is, the ranch runs better with you here." A warmth that had nothing to do with the spring air spread through Sarah's chest. "Even so," she said softly, "people will talk." "Let them," Isaiah replied, his eyes meeting hers. Unless you're concerned about your reputation," Sarah laughed, a sound that still surprised her when it came. "My reputation was in tatters the moment I left my husband. At least now, the rumors might be about something that brings me joy." The words hung between them, full of meaning neither was quite ready to acknowledge. Isaiah cleared his throat. "I'm riding into town tomorrow for supplies," he said. Would you like to come along?" Sarah hesitated. She hadn't left the ranch since her arrival, hadn't faced the stares and whispers that surely awaited her in Elmwood. "Yes," she said finally. "It's time I stopped hiding." The next morning dawned clear and bright. Sarah wore her blue dress, now mended and clean, and a bonnet Isaiah had purchased for her on his last trip to town. They rode in his wagon, side by side, the tension in Sarah's shoulders growing as the buildings of Elmwood came into view. The stares began immediately. Women pulled their children closer as the wagon passed. Men stopped their conversations to watch. By the time they reached the general store, it felt as though the entire town was observing their every move. Inside the store, the usual buzz of conversation died as they entered. Isaiah nodded politely to Peter Williams, who stood behind the counter with a sour expression. "We need flour, coffee, sugar," Isaiah said, handing the shopkeeper a list. "And these other items." Williams glanced at the list, then at Sarah, his lip curling slightly. "We're out of sugar." It was a blatant lie. Sarah could see sacks of sugar on the shelf behind him. "That's odd," Isaiah said calmly. "You had plenty last week." "Like I said, we're out." Williams crossed his arms. "For you, anyway." Sarah felt Isaiah tense beside her, saw the muscle in his jaw tighten. Before he could respond, the door opened, and a woman entered. Mrs. Wilson from the boarding house, whose door had been the first to close in Sarah's face. "Well, look who's here," Mrs. Wilson said loudly, "the runaway wife and her protector." Several men who had been loitering near the back of the store moved closer. "We're just here for supplies," Isaiah said, his voice level. "No trouble." "Should have thought of that before you brought her to your home," one of the men said. "People are talking, Freeman. Saying all kinds of things about what goes on out at your ranch." Sarah felt her face flush with anger. "Mr. Freeman helped me when no one else would. He's been nothing but respectful and kind." "Kind, is he?" Mrs. Wilson laughed, a harsh sound. "And what do you offer in return for such kindness?" The implication was unmistakable. Isaiah's hand found Sarah's elbow, gently guiding her toward the door. "We'll get our supplies elsewhere," he said quietly. As they stepped back onto the street, a small crowd had gathered. Hostile faces surrounded them. Someone spat on the ground near Isaiah's boots. "You've overstayed your welcome in this town, boy," a voice called out. Isaiah's expression remained impassive, but Sarah could feel him trembling with contained anger as he helped her back into the wagon. They left Elmwood without the supplies they needed, the weight of the town's hatred following them all the way back to Crescent Moon Ranch. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. The ugliness they had encountered in town had awakened old fears, not for herself, but for Isaiah. He had risked so much by taking her in, and for what? A woman he barely knew, with nothing to offer but gratitude. She was still awake when the smell of smoke reached her. At first she thought it might be from the fireplace, but it was too strong, too acrid. Jumping from her bed, she ran to the window and saw the nightmare unfolding in the darkness. Flames leaping from the roof of the barn, orange and angry against the night sky. "Isaiah!" she screamed, running to wake him, but he was already up, pulling on his boots. "The horses," he said, his voice tight with urgency. "We need to get them out." They raced to the barn, the heat intensifying as they drew closer. Isaiah wrapped a wet cloth around his face and plunged into the smoke-filled structure. Sarah heard the frightened neighing of the horses, saw shadows moving within the flames. One by one, Isaiah led the panicked animals out, first Silver, then the two workhorses, and finally the young colt born just months earlier. As the last horse cleared the barn doors, a burning beam crashed down, narrowly missing Isaiah as he staggered out, coughing and soot-covered. Sarah ran to him, supporting him as they moved away from the inferno. Together they watched as the barn, built by Isaiah's own hands over the course of a year, was consumed by flames. In the flickering light, Sarah saw something that made her blood run cold. Near the edge of the property, several mounted figures watched the destruction. Even at a distance, she recognized Mayor Thompson's distinctive hat. "They did this," she whispered, horror and guilt washing over her. "Because of me." Isaiah's arm encircled her shoulders, steadying her. His voice, when he spoke, was raw from smoke but determined. "No, Sarah, not because of you, because of who I am, because of what I represent." He turned to look at her, his eyes reflecting the flames. "Because I dared to live as a free man, making my own choices, including the choice to open my door to someone who needed shelter." As the barn collapsed in a shower of sparks, the mounted figures turned and rode away, satisfied with their night's work. Isaiah and Sarah remained, watching until the flames began to die down, until the first hint of dawn appeared on the horizon. "What will you do now?" Sarah asked, her voice small in the aftermath of destruction. Isaiah surveyed the smoking ruins, then looked across his land, still his despite their efforts to drive him away. "I'll rebuild," he said simply. "I've started from nothing before. I can do it again." He turned to her, his expression softening. "The question is, what will you do, Sarah Mitchell?" In the days following the fire, word spread quickly through the surrounding countryside. By the end of the week, something remarkable happened, something neither Isaiah nor Sarah could have predicted. They came from miles around, other ranchers, farmers, a few traders who regularly passed through the territory. Men who had never spoken to Isaiah before arrived with lumber, nails, tools. Women brought food and bandages for hands blistered from work. Most surprising of all was the arrival of 3 Cheyenne families from the north who had traded with Isaiah in the past and respected the black rancher who always dealt fairly with them. "We heard about the fire," said Jacob Turner, a rancher from 10 miles east who had never before set foot on Crescent Moon land. "Figured you could use some help rebuilding." Isaiah stood speechless as wagons continued to arrive throughout the morning. Sarah moved to his side, her hand finding his. "Not everyone thinks like Elmwood," she said softly. By midday, the frame of a new barn was taking shape, larger and sturdier than the original. Men who had never worked together, white, black, native, found common purpose in raising walls, securing beams, laying planks for the roof. Sarah organized the women who had come, setting up an outdoor kitchen to feed the workers. As she moved among them, She heard snippets of conversation, piecing together the truth of what had happened in town. Reverend Simmons and the mayor were bragging about it at the saloon, one woman told her while chopping potatoes, but when word got out beyond Elmwood, people were disgusted. Burning a man's barn, that crosses a line no matter who he is or who he takes in. By sunset, the basic structure of the barn was complete. The workers departed with promises to return the next day. Isaiah and Sarah stood together, looking at what had been accomplished in a single day. "I never expected this," Isaiah said, wonder in his voice. "Neither did I," came a voice from behind them. They turned to find Mayor Thompson standing at the edge of the property, alone this time, his horse tethered to a fence post. His usual arrogance was missing, replaced by something that looked almost like shame. "I came to say this wasn't my doing," Thompson said, removing his hat. "The fire. That was Simmons and Williams and their liquored-up friends. I was there, yes, but I didn't." He trailed off, seeming to realize the weakness of his denial. "What do you want, Mayor?" Isaiah asked, his voice neutral. Thompson gestured toward the new barn. "When word got around about what happened, people were angry. Not just at Simmons and the others, at me, at all of Elmwood." He shifted uncomfortably. "The traders are threatening to bypass our town completely. The cattle buyers said they won't do business with us. And now you're concerned about the consequences," Sarah said, unable to keep the edge from her voice. "I'm here to make it right," Thompson replied. "The men responsible will pay for the damages, and—" He hesitated, looking directly at Isaiah for perhaps the first time. "And the town council wants to offer you a contract to supply beef for Elmwood and for the railroad workers coming through next month." Isaiah was silent for a long moment. "And Mrs. Mitchell," he finally asked, "will she be welcome in town as well?" Thompson's gaze shifted to Sarah. "The council discussed that too. Her situation is her own business. Elmwood has no quarrel with her." It wasn't quite an apology, but it was a surrender of sorts. Sarah felt Isaiah's hand find hers, his fingers intertwining with her own in full view of the mayor. "I'll consider the contract," Isaiah said, "but I have conditions of my own." After Thompson departed, Isaiah and Sarah sat on the porch of the cabin, watching as stars appeared one by one in the darkening sky. The scent of smoke still hung in the air, but now it mingled with the smell of fresh-cut lumber and new beginnings. "Did you mean it?" Sarah asked, breaking the comfortable silence. "About your conditions?" Isaiah nodded. "Equal prices for my cattle, no special fees that only I have to pay, and respect, not just for me, but for anyone who works for me or—" He paused, glancing at her. "Or shares my life." Sarah's heart quickened. "Is that what you want? For me to share your life?" Isaiah turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "From the moment I opened my door and saw you standing there, something changed for me. I've spent years keeping to myself, building walls to protect what's mine. But you—" He smiled, the full, rare smile that transformed his face. "You made me remember that a home needs more than walls and a roof. It needs warmth. It needs life." Sarah felt tears gathering in her eyes. "When I came here, I was running from a man who saw me as property, who tried to break my spirit. I never thought I would trust anyone again." "And now?" Isaiah asked, his voice gentle. "Now I know what it means to be seen, truly seen by someone who values my strength instead of fearing it." She squeezed his hands. "You said I was beautiful to you that first night, when I was at my lowest. No one had ever looked at me that way before." "Because it's true," Isaiah said simply. "Not just your face or your form, though those are lovely too. Your courage, your kindness, the way you faced down an entire town today without flinching, that's beauty that doesn't fade." In the silver moonlight, with the newly framed barn standing as testament to unexpected allies and fresh starts, Isaiah Freeman leaned forward and kissed Sarah Mitchell for the first time, gently, reverently, as if she were the most precious thing he had ever held. When they finally parted, Sarah rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beating of his heart. "What happens now?" she whispered. Isaiah's arms tightened around her. "Now we build," he said. "Not just a barn, a life. together. In the years that followed, Crescent Moon Ranch grew and prospered. Isaiah and Sarah Freeman became known throughout the territory for their fair dealings and generous hospitality. Their door remained open to travelers, to those in need, to anyone seeking shelter from life's storms. And if anyone in Elmwood or beyond ever questioned their union, they needed only to see the couple together. The strength they found in each other, the respect that flowed between them, the love that had transformed not only their own lives but an entire community, to understand that some bonds transcend all boundaries created by human prejudice. For in opening his door that stormy night and saying, "Come in, you're beautiful to me," Isaiah Freeman had done more than save a woman in distress. He had begun a ripple of change that would touch countless lives for generations to come. And there you have it, friends, the remarkable story of Isaiah and Sarah Freeman, two souls who found in each other the courage to stand against hatred and build something beautiful in its place. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment now to like this video, subscribe to the Black Rancher channel, and share this with someone who needs to be reminded that true beauty lies in courage, compassion, and the willingness to open doors when others close them. Your support allows us to continue uncovering these hidden chapters of American history, the stories of black cowboys, ranchers, and pioneers whose contributions helped shape our nation, but were deliberately erased from our history books. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Until next time, remember, in a world that's quick to judge, be the one who says, "Come in, you're beautiful to me."